All right, welcome back to IEP Breakdown. Today we will be doing part 3 of the IEP Breakdown class 3 of 6. And today we will be talking about section 3 and section 4. So section 3 will be talking about special considerations and accommodations. We will look at extended school year services and transition services in section 3. We will also look into setting up goals in section 4. We'll look at how to write goals and objectives, how to evaluate the goals and objectives that you currently have written for your child, and then we will review the documents and make sure that you agree with the goals and believe that they are appropriate and sufficient. So for today's class, I want to make sure that everyone has all the materials you need on hand. So I'm going to flip through and just briefly show every tool that we're going to use. And we will start with our IEP Breakdown tool. We will be on page 3, which is, we will be on I thought I had this one set up. We will be on page 9, which is special considerations and accommodations. We need our instructions for using the IEP Breakdown tool, which will be on page 3 for special considerations and accommodations, so those two will match. And you will need your child's current IEP, and you will need to be on the page that begins up here with special considerations and accommodations. And that page will be different for every student because it depends on how much is in their IEP. So the page numbers will change. Don't consider the page numbers, just focus on looking for your first page of special considerations and accommodations. You will also need the IEP Breakdown interview. This is just a tool to use for brainstorming and coming up with what are parent concerns about their child. So if you're worried about language development, if you're worried about fine or gross motor skills, functional life skills, any concerns that you have should be highlighted in one of these 2 pages. And I've provided lots of ideas, but you can also add anything else that may be of concern that you would like to have added to your child's IEP if it's not already there. So I am going to switch over to our PowerPoint. And for the PowerPoint, if you have that available, you're going to want to be on page 38, which again is special considerations and accommodations. Also, it would be very helpful for you to have a highlighter and a pen as we work through this process. And you want to have 2 more tools, which are your IEP action plan and your outside of school action plan, so that as you go through your child's IEP and you notice areas that are concerning, it may lead you to have a moment where you want to make sure you get some additional testing. Maybe you want to get a private occupational therapy assessment or a private PT assessment or a neuropsych, or maybe you want to ask the school if they could do additional testing or ask for an additional service or goal. So you'll use those 2 tools to just provide yourself a reminder of things that you need to do at a later date to make sure that your child gets all of the services that they need. Okay, so let's get started. Since last week, everyone should have had a chance to complete sections 1 and sections 2 of their child's IEP. And each of you should now have your own rough draft of your parental input written by you, not the school. So this would reflect all of your concerns for your child, your your perspective on their strengths, their needs, and anything that else needs to get added into the IEP moving forward. Okay, let's look at your child's IEP and begin with section 3. I'm going to switch my screen, and you are going to work through looking at each of these issues on this page and ask yourself, does your child have any issues with communication? And that could be expressive or receptive or pragmatic. It might be that they require special devices. Maybe they use sign language. Anything at all that they have a need for should be reflected here. Also, if your child struggles with something like anxiety and you know that they have a difficult time speaking when they feel anxious, that would also be worth reflecting in this section. So they might not require any assistive technology or specific goals, but they might need added support or structure to encourage them to be able to communicate during times of stress. Next, we would look at needs for assistive technology. And if your child requires any type of assistive technology, you can indicate that on this form. And anytime you disagree with what the school is telling you about any of these services, you have the right to disagree. And so if your child, we're going to run through this and then we'll talk a little bit more about how to handle disagreements. But if your child receives services for deaf or hearing impaired, if they have visual impairments, if they have behavioral plans, all of these accommodations would be reflected in this section of the IEP. And if the child is an English learner or a ESOL student, that would also be reflected here. So anytime that you see a disagreement in each of these areas, what you want to do is use your highlighter to highlight that area and then carry that information across to your child's IEP plan, or I'm sorry, to the IEP breakdown tool. You're going to transcribe the information into the tool, and then you're also going to reflect any changes that you may want to have. So for example, as we start looking at instructional and assessment accessibility features, if you look through these different options, you may recognize something and say, oh, that might be really helpful for my son, or I think my daughter would benefit from having this support or this service. You can request it. So put it on your IEP action plan so that the next time you have an IEP meeting, you can remember to ask for that support or service. All of these are just continuations of different accommodations, both for instructional and assessment. So if they receive an accommodation as an instructional accommodation, they would also be eligible to have that accommodation for standardized testing or assessments. So these are just pages and pages of different types of accommodations that they can request. At the very bottom here, you'll see extended time. Extended time is usually 1.5. Occasionally, you may need to ask for additional time, like 2 times or more, or if there are unique scheduling requests, they could be reflected in here as well. So let's see. Okay, so in the next section, supplementary aids and services, program modifications and supports, they list for you on all of these pages what the different services are that are available to your child. They list the frequency, the start date, the end date, and who is providing the service. And just always know that you have input, you have the right to have input in how the IEP is designed. So if you disagree with the service, or you would like to have it more frequently, or you would like to change who is providing the service, you have the right to bring that up at an IEP meeting and have a discussion and advocate for your child and try and get that IEP changed. So if there is something that you read in the IEP and you don't understand what it is telling you, please take the time to ask for clarification. This is a very important document, and you need to be comfortable with the decisions that you're making. And if you don't understand what the IEP says, then you're not going to be able to fully advocate for your child. If that is the case, there are a couple different ways you can handle it. Number one is you can request additional time for your IEP meetings outside of the IEP meeting so that you can have one-on-one time walking through the process and just learning how the IEP process works. So those would all be different options to learn, or they would all be different options to give you the time that you need to better understand your IEP. So you should not have to feel rushed or feel like you agreed to something that you really don't understand. If you reach a point in designing your child's IEP where you and your IEP team cannot come to agreement, you need to express your disagreement in a way that is constructive, thoughtful, and respectfully persuasive. So what that means to me is it's not appropriate to get angry at an IEP meeting. It's not appropriate to blame someone at an IEP meeting, but focus on the needs of the child and helping them understand why those needs are so important. So what I do is I just calmly and persistently advocate for my child on their behalf to make sure that their needs are met. And when we reach a point that we cannot agree on a decision, I use prior written notice, which is the parent asking the school to document the fact that the school and the parent cannot come to resolution on an issue, or that the school is unwilling to consider what the parent is asking. And when that happens, that needs to be documented in the IEP, and that is called prior written notice. Okay, so next we move on to supplementary aids, services, program modifications, and supports. So here we go with those, and these last for a few pages. I believe there are 3. Let's make sure there aren't. Yeah, just 3 pages. And they provide the options for you. So you can read through the nature of the service, the frequency, beginning, ending, and providers, and you can have input on what services you believe your child would benefit from. Again, you have to use your advocacy skills and know that you have the right to request it. You have to be able to support the need or the reason that you're asking for those services. So that gets us through that section. Extended school year needs to be decided usually in mid-spring, and I believe it's around early April that the schools need to have a decision when, if the child is eligible for ESY. So ESY, there is a series of questions that need to be asked to determine if the child is eligible. And what becomes important is determining the need for critical life skills. So they go through a series of questions and ask, does the student's IEP include annual goals related to critical life skills? Yes or no? And you have to answer each of these questions. Is there a presence of emerging or breakthrough skills or breakthrough opportunities? Yes or no? Are there significant interfering behaviors? Does the nature and severity of the disability warrant ESY? Are there other specific circumstances that require ESY? So after you have answered all of these questions, that is when the decision should be made if they are eligible. Now, what's important, what I believe is very important for parents to understand, is that this is a highly subjective process. Most parts of the IEP process are more objective, and this is one of those times when it is subjective. And that means that the school administration and the school staff have a lot of ability to interpret whether or not it's appropriate. I encourage parents to make their own decision in deciding, is it a critical life skill? If it is an emerging or breakthrough skill, if it's interfering, or if it is severe enough. Don't just take their word for it. You need to ask yourself, what do you feel is most important? So just know that this is very subjective and that parents always have the right to request prior written notice if they disagree, or if they disagree and they can't come to resolution. Okay. Next in section 3 is transition. And transition services are designed to be implemented no later than 14 years of age, and often they are encouraged to start younger, as young as 10 or 12. But through state and federal regulations, they are required no later than 14 years of age. Now, what does that mean to you? Number one is that beginning at age 14, your child should attend. They should be invited to participate in their IEP meeting because they have a right to actively make decisions about their education and planning for their future. The student has the right to decline participation, but it is very helpful to have them there. And just so you know, schools are very comfortable helping you navigate this because sometimes it's difficult to have the child there while you're talking about them or making difficult decisions. So sometimes what they do early on is they invite the student to participate for their first few IEP meetings just at the beginning of the meeting so that they have an opportunity to get comfortable with participating at an IEP meeting and seeing how the process works. They may be able to answer a few questions, they may be able to read a statement, and then they can be invited to stay or leave. So that gives the student the exposure to the process and the opportunity to get comfortable and share any concerns that they may have, and also see the large number of participants that are there to support that child, so that our goal is to ensure that each child has success through their IEP process and through their educational journey. And I think it's important for them to see who from their school and who from their family sits around that table to help design their best IEP for that child. So parents should consider once transition services start, parents need to start thinking about what is high school going to look like for their child. Where will they go to high school? Will they go to their home school? Will they go to a special school like a trade school or a technical school? Maybe they have a strong interest in medicine or science if they have special schools that they could consider. They need to decide if their child will be diploma tracked or certificate tracked. So these would all be important things to consider at the IEP meeting, at the transition portion of the IEP meeting. So parents and children together can talk about the different options and areas of interest which would help to decide where they would go to school. This is also a time that we talk about planning for exiting the school system. So we talked about whether or not the high school diploma or certificate. And then we can also ask, how many years do we anticipate it will take this child to graduate from high school? Because once they reach the high school level, credits matter, and we want them to be successful. So maybe we want to plan on a 6-year high school career instead of a traditional 4-year career. Children with IEPs are eligible to stay in high school until the year that they complete their 21st birthday. So for example, if a child turns 21 in April, they would finish that year in June, and then they would be done. If a child turns 21 in August, they would be able to finish that year. They would get one more year of school, and they would finish in June just before they turn 22. So parents can have input on when the child would graduate, and that can be anywhere from 4 and up to 7 years. So once a child enters high school, it becomes more difficult to extend graduation. So it's something that's important to consider. It usually by that 7th or 8th grade, those years when they're having their IEP meeting, you want to really consider if it's going to require additional time. Okay, something that has recently changed in special ed law in the state of Maryland is transition activities. So transitioning age students have been required to have transition activities for the past several years, but they did not require any progress like a traditional goal. So students who have transitioning goals now get quarterly progress just like they would on other goals. So are they making progress on their goals? Are they partially making them? Have they completed them? And then those transition goals should advance just like a regular IEP goal. And the other thing that we want to emphasize is that transition goals need to look beyond just academics, but we want to focus on academics, employment, and independent living, which would also be known as functional life skills. So, for example, your child might be doing very well with their general ed requirements toward graduation. They're participating in all of their classes, but maybe they don't have independence skills in being able to communicate to get through a job interview. Then that would be an appropriate job skill that you would want to develop. Or maybe they need to learn how to take a bus or use public transportation. That can go in as an IEP goal as well as an IEP transition goal. Maybe for independent living, they need to learn how to manage their money, or they need to learn how to cook a simple meal. Those can also be provided as independent living goals. And in general, children that are, or youth that are receiving a certificate, they often get a lot of independent living and transportation goals in their IEP. Sometimes or their daily living skills, those get pretty met for a child with a certificate. But if a child is diploma tracked, sometimes there are still needs for these areas of functional living, independent living, and transportation, but they get overlooked because they're so focused on earning their credits. So this might be a good reason to consider extending the child's high school career so that they have access to independent living transition goals. I hope that makes sense, but that's very important for transitioning youth. Okay, now we move into special considerations and accommodations and starting to look at agency linkages. So once a child is of transition age, they are also eligible for programs like pre-ETS, through DOORS. You want to make sure that you have done your DOORS application, your DDA application. If your child needs behavioral health administration services, then you would want to do that application as well. So at transition age, you're starting to connect with all of these services and starting to access pre-ETS programs in the summer and doing DOORS assessments to figure out what their needs are so that you have a smooth transition exiting the school system. Okay, so that is the bulk of section 3 and meeting all of their accommodations and what else? We just covered a whole bunch. Accommodations, special considerations, modification, anything like that we have just covered. So let's just take a break for a moment now. Okay, we're going to get started now talking about goals. And when we talk about goals, we're going to talk about both goals and objectives. And goals are what we hope the child can accomplish in the next 12 months period. So over the next 12 months of school, what is reasonable that your child can accomplish? So the goal should be designed to be met within 1 year. Goals can have as many as 4 objectives, and you can decide how many different types of objectives your child may need to help support meeting that goal. So basically, an objective is a smaller, more measurable step to meet the broad goal. Okay, and as we talk about goals, some people like to use the term SMART goals. SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So as you design a goal, you want to consider all of those things in your goal. Is it clearly written so that if your child is making progress or meeting the goals on their current IEP, and you're going to transcribe the goal from the IEP to the IEP Breakdown tool, and you're going to look at all of this year's goals. You're also going to reflect back onto last year's goals and make sure that there were no goals that got dropped that should have been carried over. Or were there goals that you were told that the goal was met and it was discontinued? Sometimes a goal can be met but should not be discontinued because the child still remains delayed in that area. So in that case, what you would want to see is that the goal should become advanced, not eliminated. So for example, if a goal states that a child will respond when their name is called on 4 out of 5 occasions, 80% of the time, and they have met that goal, maybe the next goal is that it occurs 90% of the time, or 5 out of 5 occasions. So you can advance the goal, or you can add to the goal instead of just saying, well, the goal was met, so you have to eliminate the goal. So you'll have to make decisions on how the goal is written. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Was the goal carried over from the year prior, or was it released? Do you agree with it being closed, or should it have just been advanced? Do you agree that all of the objectives support the goal, or should there be different objectives? Always remember that you have the right to disagree. And if you disagree, you have the right to discuss it at the IEP meeting, again, in that clear, confident way that is persuasive but not confrontational. So you want to be constantly asking yourself, do the goals meet the needs of the child? So if you reflect back to the first tool that we completed after class 1, which was the IEP Breakdown interview or assessment tool, you want to make sure that all of the child's needs are addressed through the IEP. So if there are areas of need that are not being addressed, you should ask yourself, should they have a goal for this area? So you're constantly working to close the gap between where your child's level of functioning is and where their peers are, because you want to help them get as close to where they should be as they can. Let's see. So as you're filling out these tools, you're going to transcribe all of the IEP breakdown goals onto the new IEP breakdown tool from the current IEP or previous IEP as needed. And then if there are any additional changes that you would like to see, you want to carry them into an IEP action plan. Or if this is another trigger for you, like, oh yeah, I meant to get a new speech therapy evaluation for my child. It's been 3 years. I really wanted the private speech therapist to do it instead of in the school because they have different resources, or whatever your reason. You have your in-school action plan, your out-of-school action plan. So you want to continue to use both of those to help guide you moving forward. So that is basically how you write goals and objectives. And goals and objectives are written once a year and carried out throughout the year. The other things you need to understand are the progress on the goals. And a lot of parents don't realize how important IEP goal progress is. So IEP progress comes out at the same time as the report card. So when you get the report card, if your child has an IEP, you should also be receiving the progress report each quarter. And you want to read that thoroughly, and what you're looking for is, and it's right here on this section of the right on this bottom section where it says progress code. Is the goal achieved? Are they making sufficient progress to meet the goal? Or is it a newly introduced skill, not making progress sufficient to meet the goal, or not yet introduced? So we're going to talk about these because this is very important. So if your child has, let's say they have an IEP meeting of the last week of May. Every year their IEP falls on the last week of May. Well, in 2 weeks, school will close and they will get their fourth quarter report card. So if they had new goals that were just introduced 2 weeks prior when the new IEP came out, it would be very reasonable for a goal to not yet have been introduced because they've only had 2 weeks. So they wouldn't truly get feedback on that goal until the following fall, unless they're in summer school or ESY services. So that is when it would be appropriate for not yet introduced to be used. If it says that they have achieved the goal, then the school may want to discontinue the goal. And again, I encourage you to ask yourself, is the child now performing at the same level as their same-aged peers? Or should the goal be advanced until they are functioning at the same level as their same-aged peers? So just because a goal is quote-unquote achieved does not mean that the goal should go away. So you need to consider what would be the next step for that child. But in that case, even if it's during the year, maybe halfway through the year, they achieve the goal. That doesn't mean get rid of it. That means it should probably, most of the time, it should be advanced. Now, most of the time, the feedback you will get on your progress is making sufficient progress to meet the goal. Now, that means that they are working on the goal, they are achieving some objectives, and that as long as they continue to make the progress that they are currently meeting in the IEP process, that they should obtain achieving the goal by the end of the year. That is what that means. The alternative to that would be not making sufficient progress to meet the goal. Now, if you ever see not making sufficient progress to meet the goal as selected, then an IEP meeting is supposed to be scheduled within 30 days to determine why they are not making sufficient progress. So is it that the goal turned out to be too difficult? Is the child struggling with some of the smaller objectives? So you'll have to reevaluate what is contributing that they cannot make progress on that goal. And then the other thing I just want to share with you about making sufficient progress to meet the goal is sometimes, so along with the box being checked, there will also be examples of what they are seeing. So for example, if they are making progress on increasing the length of their sentences, and maybe their goal is to be able to put together 6 to 8 words in a sentence, but down below it says description of progress. Maybe it says that they are now consistently able to put 3 or 4 words together, but the goal is much higher. So if there's a gap like that and it does not look like they are making sufficient progress, or if they are showing signs of regression, sometimes the teachers accidentally select the wrong box, because I think that the making sufficient progress might be pre-selected, or they're just so used to selecting that box. So it is worth double checking to make sure that the description of what is actually happening matches the fact that they are making sufficient progress. So what you're looking for is the trend in progress through each quarter. So if someone is at like 3 to 4 words in the first quarter, then hopefully they would see 4 to 5 words in the second quarter, or 5 to 6 words in the third quarter. So you're seeing progress. But if suddenly you're seeing regression, then that's a red flag that maybe there's a problem. And that is when an IEP meeting should be reconvened to evaluate. And they might just say, well, there was some sickness or there were special circumstances, and we think that the goal is still appropriate, but they just haven't made sufficient progress this quarter, but that we still think that the goal is achievable by the end of the year. Or they might say, well, based on another set of circumstances, maybe the child had surgery or the child has shown signs of regression, then maybe it would be appropriate to go ahead and change that goal. So all things to consider as you're designing the goal and as you're evaluating the goal. Now, at the bottom of the goal, at the bottom of the page, it will say, how often is the parent notified? If you want more feedback than quarterly, you have the right to ask. You can ask for weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, interim. You can ask for as much as you need. You can ask for an email. You can ask for a daily checklist. Usually the younger kids might need more support, and then as they get older, hopefully they require a little bit less support. So you just know that you have the right to ask for different amounts of communication with your team. So that is an overview on goals and objectives.